Hello, and welcome to Coding with Kriller. Today we are going to be discussing variables. I mentioned variables in my last video, and you're probably wondering what they are. Well, I think that Chris Odom said it best in the first volume of his textbook when he compared variables to boxes that you use to store data. Basically, variables are tiny containers for all different types of data, such as numbers and letters. Let's look at a few different types of variables. I won't be discussing all of the variable types today because there are a lot and we're not going to use all of them. But I will discuss the four main ones: bytes, integers, floats, and strings. To understand variables, you have to understand bits and bytes. A bit is the smallest possible piece of computer storage and can either be a 1 or a 0. A byte is 8 bits. Because each bit has two possible states and a byte has 8 bits, one byte of computer memory can store 2 to the 8th numbers, which means it can store any number from 0 to 255. As you've probably guessed, a byte variable takes up 1 byte of computer memory, which means it can store any number from 0 to 255. An integer variable, on the other hand, takes up 4 bytes of computer memory, which means it can hold 2 to the 32 different numbers, ranging from -2,147,483,648 to +2,147,483,647. Next up are floats. Floats take up 4 bytes of memory, just like integers, but instead of only being able to hold integers, they can also hold decimals, with a capacity of up to 7 digits after the decimal point. If you need extra precision, you can also use a double variable, which is a float that takes up 8 bytes of storage space and can remember things up to 16 digits after the decimal point. Finally, we have strings. Strings don't really have a set amount of bytes they take up. Instead, they're used to hold text and use as many bytes as they need. So now we know that variables act as storage space for data, and we know some types of variables. Now it's time to talk about what variables are used for. The first thing we can use variables for is to give your program access to data it might need. For example, say that your program will tell people how much they weigh on different planets. To do this, it will need to know the mass of different planets. For example, Pluto. Since the program can't search up mass on its own, we can create a variable named Pluto mass and set it equal to the mass of Pluto. The next thing we can use variables for is to store data from sensors or equations. For example, if we have a robot that uses an infrared sensor to navigate a table, we can store this data in a variable named infaredData. We can then run this data through an equation and store it in another variable named infaredEquation. Another thing variables are used for is to make the code easier to read and write. In Blink, pin 13 was used a lot. Since 13 is a weird number to remember, putting it in a variable named LED makes it easier to use in the code. Variables can also be used for easy control of the code. If we wanted to make the LED blink fast twice and slow 3 times, it would be annoying to have to change the same number a bunch of times to change the blinking speed. Instead, we can use a variable named blinkFast and a variable named blinkSlow that will make changing the blinking rate that much easier. Finally, we can use variables to move data between functions. Functions are a way of organizing code that I'll cover in a later video. So for now, I'll use a metaphor to explain them. If we view a program as a house, then each line of code is like an appliance that does something. Functions are like rooms that keep the necessary appliances organized. Just like how in a house you have a kitchen with all the appliances for cooking and a laundry room with all the appliances for cleaning, in coding you may have a function with all the code for calculating someone's weight on a planet, and another function used for telling the person their result. To move the data found in the first function to the second, we can use a variable named personWeight. This is by no means an exhaustive list of all the creative ways in which you can use variables. Feel free to come up with your own ways as well. However, these are the main ways, and you should be able to use them to code just about anything. Now that we know what variables are and how to use them, let's look at how to code them. The first thing we need to do to code a variable is to create it. This is called declaring a variable. To declare a variable, type its data type, then its name, and then a semicolon. But where should you declare your variable? One place to declare a variable is in the space before the setup. This makes it a global variable. Global variables can be used in all places in your code, so this is a good space to declare variables that move data between functions are a reference to multiple functions. An example of this is the LED variable, which is referenced all throughout the code. If the variable is going to be filled with data at a later point, leave it as it is. However, if it is going to contain data that doesn't change, like the mass of Pluto or the speed of light, put the keyword constant before it. This makes it a constant, which means it can't be changed later on in the code. On the other hand, you can declare a variable in a function. A variable declared in a function is destroyed after the function is finished running. If you're going to need a variable for use in a calculation or for finding sensor data that will be used in the same function, then declaring the variable locally is a good idea. The reason for this is that by destroying the variable after the function is done running, you can reuse the variable's name in another function. It also makes the code much tidier and easier to understand because there aren't 50 lines of functions being declared above the setup. Speaking of naming variables, let's talk about some quick variable naming rules. Variable names can't start with a number, can't include special characters such as the @ sign, and can't contain spaces, although underscores are allowed. They also can't share a name with a word already used in the Arduino language, like true or false. If you see your variable name become any color besides black, pick a different one. Finally, use descriptive variable names that are related to the data they will be holding, like thermometer, for a variable that will hold data from a thermometer. And above all, use camel case. Camel case is a naming convention in which the first word is started off lowercase, and all the following words are started off uppercase. Underscores are not used at all. While this is not necessary, it is standard practice, makes the code look nicer, and will gain you more respect from other coders. Now you may be wondering how you can begin applying variables. At this point, you should try messing around with variables in Blink. See which data type you can declare the LED variable as. Integer isn't the only one. Also, do what I did earlier in the video and have your LED blink fast and then slow. Try out different speeds and use variables to control large amounts of code with just one number. Above all, have fun. I hope that you have a great day, and I will see you in my next video. This pandemic created a lot of problems. Nurses are tired, hungry, and stressed. Meanwhile, many people are out of jobs. I'd like to ask you to consider donating to Fuel the Fight. Fuel the Fight is an organization that takes your money that you donate and pays restaurants to make meals for nurses. That way, the restaurants can continue to employ some people, making it much easier for many to survive this pandemic, while also making sure that nurses get the food they need and don't have to worry about lunch when they're performing life-saving operations on patients with COVID-19. It's a really tough time now, and if you have any spare change, please consider this. It could really make a difference.